This is Matillion Broadcasting Corporation. Inspired to inspire.
It is a good evening, Nkayi Parliament. My name is Atros Banda. I'm very humbled to be part of this great initiative where citizens converge and discuss issues that are of national pertinence. Atros Banda is a young man who has been an activist for quite some time, born in a family of 8 and being the last born. I'm a married man with 3 bounty boys, and I'm married to Skangezile Matutu, who for the benefit of this group is from Nkayi. So lingamphathi njengomkhwenya njenge-guest ngingumkhwenyana ngingumntanenu. I don't want to feel at home, but I want to be at home in this group, Nkayi Parliament. Atros Banda is an activist who was instrumental in the formation of Umkhonto kaMthwakazi. Also someone who has been active in the National Constitutional Assembly, where I was elected regional youth chairperson. I also worked go MDC in various capacities, and I was eventually elected as the provincial secretary for the Youth Assembly in Bulawayo. And I was then appointed to work in the then MDC Deputy National Chairperson Love Momoyo's office. And when he ascended to the national chairman's, to be the national chairman, I was also elevated to be the national coordinator in the national chairman's office. I hold various qualifications in, especially in the tourism sector. I have qualifications in tourism and business management. I'm also a fully licensed professional hunter. I'm passionate about our wildlife conservation. I'm also passionate about the democratization process in Zimbabwe. I believe I'm one of the youthful people who still have something to offer to Zimbabwe. Ngiyabonga.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to this Ocast platform. My name is Msongelwa Ndlovu. I represent ZAPU as the national spokesperson. I was part of the revival team that participated in the revival of ZAPU and pull out from the Unity Accord in 2008-2009. I served at that time as the regional coordinator for the northern region, which comprises of Harare Province, Marsh West, Central, East, and Manicaland. I also served as a deputy director for information and publicity. Right now, I sit in the National Executive Committee of ZAPU, and consequently as the national spokesperson. Nyebo.
My name is Felix Makalela Mafaspanda, currently the Deputy National Spokesperson or Deputy National Secretary for Communication of CCC, and also a former legislator of Magwegwe between 2009 and 2013. I have many practical experiences that could spend an hour narrating who am I and where I'm from, but some of those credentials are not relevant herein. What makes me more happy is that this is my second time to debate, Mr. Speaker, with the community, with the parliament, with the community parliament of Nkayi. However, I would love to explain myself further as I will narrate relevant issues, and more importantly, my approach won't be scholastic, but very practical. It won't be academic, but real, so that we communicate together. I thank you.
Responding to your second question, my belief is that sanctions are generally penalties imposed by a state or group of states on another independent state. Usually, these sanctions are designed to cripple and eventually lead to the overthrow of a targeted state. The imposing states usually cut diplomatic ties, diplomatic and bilateral ties with the delinquent state. In the case of Zimbabwe, it is a policy-driven program designed to target individuals and institutions who undermine human rights and are involved in corrupt activities. This program is not permanent and undergoes regular reviews, leading to delistings and or new additions. These sanctions are designed to encourage behavioral change, and in the case of Zimbabwe, the imposing states have maintained diplomatic ties with Zimbabwe and continue to provide aid to both government and non-governmental organizations. Thank you.
Well, we have several types of sanctions that can be imposed upon a nation, a government, or individuals or utilities. We have sanctions that can be imposed by a country on another country. We have sanctions that can be imposed by a regional grouping or a continental grouping like the African Union or the European Union. We also have sanctions that can be imposed by world bodies like the United Nations. In the case of Zimbabwe, we have America, which is an individual country that imposed sanctions on certain individuals, companies, and we have the European Union, which is a continental grouping that also imposed targeted sanctions on some individuals, companies, and we then have to explore the differences or the similarities between the types of sanctions in general and those imposed on Zimbabwe in particular. We have to note that Zimbabwe does not have sanctions that were imposed upon it by the world body, the United Nations. But we have sanctions that were imposed by America. We have sanctions that were imposed by the European Union against certain individuals, companies, or utilities. These were actually imposed on these said people or companies because there was a blatant violation of the rule of law, human rights, and also property rights which were being violated, especially in the period from 1999 to 2000. This was at the height of the farm invasions, and during these invasions we find that there was a lot of rampant violations of human rights. People were killed, farmers were killed, ordinary people were killed, farm or land was violently taken from the commercial farmers for redistribution to landless Zimbabweans. On this note, we find that when land was grabbed from the predominantly white farmers, it was said it was going to be redistributed to many landless Zimbabweans. But we found that most of that land, especially prime land, was given to top ZANU-PF and government functionaries. And we saw the reaction from the from the United States of America and also from the European Union, who then imposed targeted sanctions on the people who were said to be directly involved in the violation of human rights and also in the violation of property rights. So in a way, Zimbabwe does not have world recognized sanctions because the United Nations did not impose the sanctions on Zimbabweans, but it was individual countries and also a regional grouping that imposed sanctions on targeted individuals, state utilities, and other functionaries.
As a former teacher, I need to explain that I'll be having media apparatus or practical examples that I will answer some of these questions. I've gone into my library of archives or archives. I will relate and relay Dr. Zobo's video about the same topic about sanctions. The other one from a scholar by Arthur Mutambara, I will also relay this, the story and what Mutambara, Dr. Arthur Mutambara, Professor Mutambara is saying about sanctions so that we move together. Lastly, I will also expose through a video by Christopher Mswangwa, the national spokesperson of ZANU-PF currently. Your number 2 question was to find out the concept or what is sanctions per se. Sanctions are prohibitive. They deter whoever has been imposed with. The word sanctions means naturally to stop so that you don't continue doing the evil you do against humanity. It's a concept of a way of how nations, individuals could be penalized so that they reform from their old dictatorial ways. Sanction is a very pregnant statement, but it is relevant to where you are, particularly in Zimbabwe. Sanctions are various and they call for different reformative tendencies, reformative behavior, so that you conform to the best interests of the world. There are 2 or 3 or 6 variances. To that effect, I want to say in Zimbabwe, we have 2 types of sanctions. The first one, self-made sanctions. First one, the one that we impose against ourselves, which means all bad laws that we do against our humanity, defective regulations, dictatorial governance methodologies, corruption, vice, adoption of people, violence, arrogance. Those are some of the sanctions we bring upon Zimbabweans. The other one, I will not talk much about it, are sanctions imposed by external forces for reasons best known to themselves. It is critical, therefore, to know that Zimbabwe has been under sanctions during the colonial era, and to this effect, it would appear history repeats itself negatively because sanctions were applied during UDI, and now, since 2000, Zimbabwe is also under sanctions. I will stop and possibly assist you people about what sanctions are as I alluded to.
This question says, history tells us that Zimbabwe, or the then Rhodesia under Douglas Ian Smith, had sanctions imposed on it. What type of sanctions were they, and how did the Smith regime sail through them? Well, some of us were quite young when the sanctions were imposed on the then Rhodesia, but from what we read, we were told or we read that Rhodesia had sanctions, economic sanctions imposed on it. There were certain restrictions that were imposed on the Smith regime. They could not freely trade with other international organizations or other international partners. We see in some pictures and some stories that there was a shortage of fuel in Rhodesia. There were fuel queues because fuel could not come in freely and so forth. The Zimbabwe Rhodesian steel could not be exported and so forth. But we find that the Smith regime also had some partners that they used to subvert or to circumvent the economic sanctions that were imposed on them. We see them building the Beira or the Feruka pipeline. We see them cooperating with the apartheid regime in the sanction busting maneuvers. We see them going through maybe South Africa for various international transactions. And we also see the Smith regime trying to adapt to the scenario that was prevailing by then by being innovative. I'll give you an example of the Aftis company. Some of you know that we have that vodka. Is it a vodka, if I'm not mistaken? Was that? I'll just remember the type of beer that those guys made. Oh, it's called blend. Yes, called blend is a result of the innovativeness of this Smith regime, who, when they could not trade, but because they wanted something to drink, they had to brew the gold blend vodka that we also enjoy up to this day. It was part of the sanctions busting moves, and it was part of the survival activities that the Smith regime undertook. We see them modifying military vehicles like the modern or the post-independence government used Puma. You remember the Puma vehicles? They were modified to suit the Rhodesian situation by then. So sanctions, in as much as they can bring suffering to the ordinary people, they also compel the government and its departments to think progressively and find means and ways of circumventing or reducing the effects of sanctions that would have been imposed on a particular regime.
Number 3 is calling for us, Mr. Speaker, say, what type of sanctions did Smith experience? Really, some of these questions, number 2, 3, are related. The types of sanctions are relevant to the imposer of sanctions. Smith's days was a rogue government against the British government, and they are the British who imposed the embargo on Ian Smith regime. By embargo, we mean economic sanctions that were imposed. It meant to say no country would have direct or indirect links economically with the Rhodesian government then, which made or suffocated its internal economic boom. It was both movement or make immigration to targeted states, no direct link economically with the world, financially and economically. So sanctions are relevant to the dictates of the imposer of those sanctions. Their intention is to make that rogue government to reform so that best interests are adhered to. The country should also honor its own constitution, its laws, honor elections results, no coup d'etats, no UDIs, but this is the essence of, I said, sanctions are punitive in nature, and they don't directly affect the ruling elite. They affect everybody because the intention is to cause what they call elections, transformative agenda, so that the general public or the populace of that state becomes ungovernable and people vote wisely. That's the essence of sanctions. It also affects the population. We know that when two elephants fight, grass hurt. This is the essence. When the people of that country vote foolishly, they are to suffer sanctions directly or indirectly so that they influence change. That's the essence. It does not run away from that fact. Thank you.
The Rhodesian Front government of Ian Smith was sanctioned after the unilateral declaration of independence, and their sanctions were intended to collapse the Smith regime. The Rhodesian Front was faced with sanctions on one hand, and on the other, they were faced with a war, but managed to mitigate the sanctions by doing the following. Firstly, they engaged corporates and governments worldwide who depended on Rhodesian products and managed to mobilize resources to pass these sanctions without complaining about them. And secondly, they invested in a robust infrastructure and industrial program to insulate their economy from the adverse effects of sanctions. I believe that they did the two mitigatory measures, and that is what helped them to ease the effects of the sanctions, which were more vicious than the sanctions faced by ZANU-PF today.
This is Matrilineal Broadcasting Corporation. Inspired to inspire.